Hi, and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep, and today we're going to be talking about the incredibly strange post that was recently found on r/RBI. This is the mystery of u/Ezekiel46J. Now, on this channel, we have dealt with our fair share of Reddit mysteries already, and they've always led to some of our favorite mysteries that we have covered. I think the reason Reddit can lead to topics that end up being so intriguing is simply due to the anonymous nature of the platform. And while it's not like 4chan where you are literally anonymous, it's still very easy to share astonishingly personal things without embarrassment or fear. This sharing of information leads to the platform having such a wide array of people. You can find regular everyday people getting or giving life advice, you can find comedic scenarios, and on the other side of the coin, you can find the tragedies and horror stories. The mystery we will be talking about today is, of course, one of those. Very recently, a post blew up on r/RBI, which, as the name of the subreddit suggests, it's the FBI but done by Reddit. This sub actively solves real-world mysteries daily, and searching for help, a user by the name of Ezekiel46J created the post.
I want to find other people who came from the place that I did.
This post has gone semi-viral already due to the disturbing nature of it, vividly explaining a place that the original poster grew up in, and we're going to read all of it. So without further ado, let's get into this.
I'm not good at remembering things from so long ago, but I'm gonna try. I grew up in rural Alabama. Our place was a bigger house that looked more so like a barn with a bunch of rooms in it. The place was past a forest and near a big cliff, and that's all I remember from the location. I don't think we had an address, but I would have not paid attention enough to see one. We weren't near any other people for probably a couple of miles. Everything was run down and falling apart. There was barely any electricity and only water sometimes, but even that wasn't much. Very low money area, and what I always knew was that there was other places like ours, and I knew of the second, 1st, 11th, 9th, and mine, which was the 6th. They were all down south. I didn't know if there were others in Alabama, but I knew 2 of them that were in Virginia and Louisiana. They had the name that sounded like Lagoon, but not quite. We weren't allowed to leave. They were absolute backwards people. The other places, though, I heard had it even worse, because they had an obsession with angels and the devil. Ours, not as much. There were around 30 adults, and kids a little less. The kids were mean as hell to each other, and all the grown-ups did was screw. I knew words to speak, but I didn't know what they meant in reading, and I couldn't write for shit. We had to use wet paper to scrub our teeth clean. The girls used old towels when they were bleeding, but some just let themselves bleed. I only had 2 shirts and 1 pair of shorts, and nobody ever got their clothes cleaned. I didn't even know my middle or last name or the day I was born. We got food every few days, but I always had something wrong with it. That was just a few things of what it was like for us. I left in 1975 when I was 12. I went with my best friend and another girl who wanted to leave too. And another kid I picked up the messes from was supposed to come, but he disappeared from behind us. I went to Virginia to find the 11th one because I had been there before. What made me do this is because I learned I had a brother who died alone in one of them when he was 12. He was disabled and they hurt him. They took his mother from him because they thought he was born with horns. I want to find others like me so I can know more about where we came from and what it was like for us. Maybe even find the ones I knew if they were still there. The only good lead I got is the one from Virginia was from Sperryville. It was hidden off, but there was a mark in a tree. I don't know what the place looks like now or if it's even there anymore. I'm not good with this stuff, and sorry this is all messy. My wife uses this site before and said it's good at helping. Thanks for anything.
Before jumping into this mystery at all, I just wanted to make some comments on the post in general. Basically, there were two things that I found really important about this post. One, the grammar is consistently awful. In the post, he seems to have a valid explanation for this too, as according to him, he didn't really learn how to read or write here. The other thing of importance I wanted to go over was the one line where he mentions leaving in 75 when he was 12. The 75 there most definitely is referring to 1975, which I wanted to clear up since there was actual confusion as to what the original poster meant here. I also wanted to create basically a list of important info about the place he was in, because after this we are going to go over a surplus of potential leads, so having all of this information organized here is going to make it much easier to figure out what leads are tangible and which leads aren't. So, this takes place in rural Alabama. The house that he stayed in was shrouded in a forest, and was more like a barn than a house. It was very trashy, without stable electricity or even drinking water. The most important detail is that there are over a dozen places like this all owned by the same company, spanning multiple states such as Virginia and Louisiana, with a name that sounded like Lagoon. It's also important to add that they marked trees. Now, that's all the really important information that we can get from the post itself, but the original poster has actually been incredibly active ever since the post was made, and has answered tons of great questions that undoubtedly will help us in the search, because he relays a ton of really important information. The first major piece of importance I found in his comments was that this place, or places, was in fact created by a woman, and while she was the creator, she wasn't necessarily a leader like how it is in most cults. This detail will unquestionably narrow our search down. He also still remembers some of the adult names, which all had religious ties, as you can see here. Here's one of the really dark parts. This place consistently beat him and even drugged him. They also had weapons on them at all times. But one comment that we must show is his very detailed remembrance of what exactly the place was like on the inside.
Most kids didn't have parents with them, and over the years I've been thinking more that they might have been taken. Babies were born there, but sometimes I just see an adult coming up with their hand around the back of the kid's neck. Maybe they were just given up or found. I was actually the odd one out because I had my dad. I think what rules there varied from place to place. But from what I heard about the others, I think ours was the most lax. I can't remember the things about God that they told us, but they had a state of mind like they were being held hostage. I could not tell if they believed what they were saying. They'd just yell all crazed and it felt freaky. It was an obsession. The thing with the religion was that they had lots of emphasis on angels. It was like they switched the roles of sins with angels. There was a woman who would fall apart at random, and she didn't want to be an angel. People would just go ballistic. I can't even begin to guess what it was all about. They were paranoid all the time. They threatened us with shotguns if they found out we went in the forest because there were angels. I feel like there's some symbolism in that. My dad in specifics had it the worst. I think he had this complex relationship with God and was obsessed and afraid, but felt a hatred for him. It's hard to talk about, but he would hurt himself so bad because he was afraid of what God would take from him if he didn't. Sometimes he called himself the devil. I lost him to this, and after I left, I wondered if I was the devil because it all started with him after I was born. Everybody had something wrong. I was so normal to it that when I started seeing emotions of regular people, I didn't get them. When the women didn't dress provocatively, somebody would always have something to say. The men were violent. They didn't want much from us, but when they did, you had to do it, or you would be beat to a pulp. Sex was all the time. Everybody and kids. Even I started too early. My mom had me at middle school age. Everything felt the opposite. It didn't feel like God.
So yeah, that's a lot of information, but that's good. It's really gonna help us with our search. Now, obviously, tons of people think it's a cult. So what we did was search up some cults from Alabama to see what we could find. The first cult we found that had some striking similarities would have to be the 12 Tribes cult. This is now a worldwide organization, but it wasn't always that way. It was founded in 1972 in the south of Tennessee specifically. It did have places in Alabama as well as some other southern states in its infancy. They also had a history of child abuse, and had symbols just like the original poster said. But by far, the most striking similarity had to go to the religious naming that the original poster mentioned. The 12 Tribes cult baptized you and gave you a Hebrew name, and when looking up all the names that the original poster mentioned here, I saw that each and every one of them were Hebrew. In fact, even the name Ezekiel is Hebrew. But while the original poster said that this place he was in was religious, that wasn't really what it was all about, unlike 12 Tribes, where that was the entire basis of it. 12 Tribes also did not have places in the middle of forests like his group did, at least from what I've read, and actually operated multiple delis and bakeries. They did have hostels, but the thing about this cult is that they aren't secretive at all. These hostels, delis, and bakeries are actually very easy to find, so the likelihood that the cult he was in was 12 Tribes is slim to none. Also, like we stated earlier, the original poster was actually injected with some sort of drug, and so were the rest of the residents. The next group that came to the minds of many was the House of Judah. When looking into what House of Judah is, there were some striking similarities. I found a personal story about what House of Judah was like, and well, let's take a look. In the 1970s, a wife and her husband were looking for a place to belong. They heard about a man who led religious classes and had a weekly radio program. He would eventually set up a community which this husband and wife would join. Things were apparently normal at the start, but then things went completely downhill. It started when they were completely cut away from their families under the reasoning that this was their family. In the early 1980s, things would get truly serious. The leader had people sign waivers to accept punishments, which in the original poster's case was very common for him. This new punishment action all culminated in 1983, where a 12-year-old kid died as a result from these punishments. This made national headlines, prompting the group to flee to rural Alabama, where it's unknown as to whether or not they continued their ways down there. So, right off the bat, there are a number of similarities here. This group started in the 1970s, they had severe punishments, and the most striking similarity is that the original poster's brother was also 12 when he died. But it's still not the House of Judah, for the simple fact that the timeline doesn't at all match up. In the mid-1970s, when the original poster left the place, he was already being beaten, and in House of Judah, the beating started in the 80s. They also didn't move to Alabama until the mid-80s as shown earlier, which completely counts out House of Judah. The original poster also mentioned his places being owned by a woman, and the owner of House of Judah was a man. So yeah, it's safe to say that he was most definitely not part of the House of Judah. Consider this theory debunked. A popular theory is that it was some sort of homeless camp, and the most popular reasoning for this is because the symbol in the tree, as many homeless camps use symbols in that way. As for the injections, it's clear that if this was really some sort of homeless camp, they were all really drugged up psychos, which could maybe explain the behavior, but that doesn't really do it for me. If these were addicts, what would they gain out of injecting this stuff to children? All that does is leave less for themselves. Also, if these people were all homeless, how did they have electricity? Original poster says it was limited, but still, if there was any at all, somebody was paying, which would rule out the theory that this was a homeless camp. But there's one other major possibility for what could be going on here. I am a skeptic, so I couldn't just leave out the possibility that this story right here is all merely a work of fiction. The creation date of the user is explained by him, but it's still a red flag. It definitely looks like this account was created specifically for the purpose of creating this elaborate story. Another red flag is the grammar. We mentioned way earlier that it's, well, awful, and this is because he didn't learn how to write. But I can't help but feel it's pretty cliche southern vocab grammar, if that makes any sense. It just feels like writing someone would make if they tried to convince us they were from the South. And I don't think I buy it. This, coupled with the creation date and the fact that more of these posts have begun popping up as of late, really has me placing some serious doubts on this one. But there is one other lead that points back in the other direction for this being genuine. And that was when I searched Alabama to see if there's any location with lagoon in it. And there was. Lagoon Park. When looking at Lagoon Park in Alabama, it doesn't seem to check out. He specifically mentions not being near any people for a couple of miles, but if you look, there is civilization everywhere. Looking at places nearby, though, reveals that it does get much more rural. Another important detail the original poster mentioned is that there were cliffs by the house that he resided in. So my next step was to search up cliffs in Alabama, and this is where my mind was blown. The city of Wetumpka has cliffs. This city is actually famous for how these cliffs came to be too. It actually happened because of a gigantic meteor from 85 million years ago. This city is very close to Lagoon, but is much more rural, which checks out. This would have to be a striking coincidence and truly does make me believe that this story is in fact real. What really sucks though is that even if people were to investigate this area, the chances that the house he lived in still being there is just so slim, because after all, 45 years was a long time ago. This meteor site was only conclusively confirmed in 1999, and now there are tours for it, but back in the days of the poster, this place was empty, and so was the surrounding area. There was, and for the most part still, is nothing but trees. With all that being said though, does this revelation make me believe in this story? No, it doesn't. To me, there's too much to convince me otherwise. Like we said already, the Reddit account was conveniently created right before the first post, and the character around it is naturally built up as someone who doesn't go on the internet too much. In fact, we even covered a mystery a few months ago which did something very similar. That grammar, vocabulary again was another humongous red flag. Like, how is somebody who has never taught proper vocab and grammar, and someone who again, still is showing us right here that his grammar and spelling is quite bad, is also going to throw out words like provocative or lax to name a few. There are also multiple moments where his grammar can break and sound pretty normal. It's all inconsistent and breaks the immersion and reality of this all. But that's not even all though. The style in which it was written, it also places severe doubts on its authenticity for me. It seems to be written in this way where it's using a lot of detail, but also not a lot of detail at the same time, if that makes sense. Like, in reality, the post itself could have been 1 or 2 paragraphs, but it was stretched way out with information to try and up its chances of being real. And to do this, of course, he conveniently can't remember the name of the place, keeps the location just vague enough to be able to theorize with, and give us a boatload of other information to try and up the realism, such as the number of people, the religious names of the people, which, as a side note, how could he remember all of them perfectly but not the name of the place, and other things like the tree marks and the number of the other places like his. It just seems like these things were added to increase the reader's likelihood of believing it. And then there are things like the fact he had no idea what day he was born, but he knows he was 12 in 1975. And what about his birth certificate? So yeah, this mystery is easily debunked. While interesting, this story is absolutely not real. There are just way too many things convincing otherwise, whether that be grammar, the plot holes, or the convenient Reddit creation date and character as a result of that. There is no way this is real. Thank you guys so much for watching. Very quickly, I want to give a huge thank you to Barely Sociable for being a huge part of this video. That was very much appreciated. Make sure to follow all of our social medias for updates and exclusive content, all linked in the description. Especially consider becoming a patron, as even $1 a month really helps and you guys get some slick rewards. And of course, make sure to like this video, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Also, subscribe to Barely Sociable, he's great. As always, my name is Seth from Debunk File. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.